Greetings. I'm Dr. Dave Britton, and this is another episode of Rasta Now, where we give you the staccato monologue on issues of today from a Rastaman point of view. Right? Now, as you know, this is the first couple of weeks of August, and the last week of July is when we celebrated the birth of Ras Tafari Makanen, who took unto himself the name Haile Selassie I, Emperor of Ethiopia, the Kings of Kings and the Lord of Lords, conquering lion of the tribe of Judah. Um, it's about 50 years since the Dirge, and who don't really know what the Dirge is, that's when the monarchy was overthrown in Ethiopia by an organized group of people. And we're going to go through it, and we're going to give it some context so that ones and one understand exactly what took place and what was happening. All right, it's not just that something happened in 1974 and concluded in 1975, which is about 50 years ago. It it started much longer than that. All right, and people understanding who His Majesty was and the role that he came to play in this time is the inception of the fight against the monarchy. And not just the monarchy, but the vision of the monarchy that His Majesty was promoting. All right. So let's go back from, say, when he first was given the governance of a particular area in Ethiopia. I'm not sure if it was Harare or wherever it was, but His Majesty was about 12, 13 years old when he was given a era in Ethiopia to administer, right? And that formed his experience in administering the state. And out of that, he stated, right, that the administration of the state was not best done by the monarchy, and that dedicated public servants were needed. The monarchy was not per se the right person to administer the state. And His Majesty moving in that direction since that time when he was about 11, 12, 13 years old. Right? Now, at that time, he was Ras Tafari. And a lot of people say Ras mean head, head creator and all of that. That's basically um, made up without knowing the etymology of the word. Right? And that's something we can get into at another time. But the name Ras Tafari, right, is Hamaric, the same language that we spoke in Kemet, later on called Egypt by the Greek conquerors. The same language, okay? Um, in Kemet, Ra was the expressive force of creation, right? Ra is the expressive force of creation. Ta in Egyptian or in Kemetic language is place. And Farai is what the, is the root of the word Pharaoh, right? Farai is the retaining wall that supported the house. Before architecture and people had this elaborate design of houses, it was just one main wall and a slant that come down to it. And so you could build one main wall and have two, three, four houses. But the main wall was the supporting wall. It support all of the houses, the main wall, right? So Rastafari mean basically, right, the supporter of the place of the creator, which is life, right? Because the Egyptian tell you in the book of knowing the creation of Ra and the overthrowing of the INDEPT dragon that when I came forth into existence, I bring everything that came into existence with me. And I found no place upon which to stand. And I created that place out of the goodness of my heart. That is how we in Kemet at the time expresses the whole formation of creation. That's how we expresses it. All right. It's not a religion thing, it's more a scientific thing. Now because we didn't use the big words and the big names and the Greek letters and the Greek name and give it all kind of scientific thing. But it was science based. Right? And that's for another um episode, right? But Tafari basically means the supporter of creation. And if you listen to what His Majesty have said over the years and how he has expresses his life and his own philosophy, you see that His Majesty was not the one to rush into war, right? The song with Bob Marley, the speech that Bob Marley made popular, and call it war, right? It should have been called peace, in a sense. But His Majesty said, we African will fight if we find it necessary. So it's not like we African are going to fight, one go kill people and do all that. No, we Africans will fight if we find it necessary because we know that we shall win, right? It's always a victory over evil. And we see that, all right? His Majesty did not murder the Egyptian, I mean the Italians. He did not murder the Italians after World War II when they were defeated and there were some of them left in Ethiopia. His Majesty went there and tell them, say, you know what? Go on home to your family. We're not going to imprison you, put you up into concentration camp, treat you bad or anything like that. Just go on home to your family. All right? His Majesty always take the side of life all the time. All the time. When Guksa came to Addis Ababa with 10,000 Muslims and wanted to take over because he felt that he should have been the emperor or his cousin should have been the emperor. And he came to Addis Ababa, and His Majesty told us in his autobiography, right? He parked 10,000 men outside of the outskirts of Addis Ababa and was planning now to invade. And His Majesty bring him into the palace and fed him, lavish him out for a number of days. And he believed now that his scheme was working. And what he didn't know was that His Majesty was going out on a regular basis and meeting with his army and giving them money and hoe and seed and all of that and telling them, no, just go on home and go farm. You don't need no war. Go on home, meet your family, live your life, and do your farming. So when Guksa feel like it's time now to spring the trap and him go back outside for bringing his army into Addis, nobody was there, right? So at all times, His Majesty always seek to preserve life. And it is emblematic of his name, the protector of life. It's not head creator or nothing like that. Just a protector of life, simple, nothing else. Right? And we see that right into the dirge. We see that into the dirge when the dirge happened. Right? Many years ago, I went down to the UN. Brethren and I went down to the UN to meet with the Ethiopian ambassador. And we had a long talk. He treated us nice, invited us in, and we spoke for maybe about an hour. And one of the things that he surprises us with was the fact that at the time, his son was supportive of the monarchy, was supportive of His Majesty. And he told us that there were many people in Ethiopia who were supportive of the monarchy, right? And that answered the question, how is it that the Dirge just came about and His Majesty folded as if there was no one to support him? And that's because His Majesty would not go to that route to start a civil war in Ethiopia. He would not pit individuals, Ethiopian against other Ethiopians, just for the sake of remaining in power. He would never do that, and he never did, right? I read a long essay recently, and it was about what was happening during the Dirge, right? And all of the things that various factions were doing. And an individual told me, not told me, but he wrote that um, he went to see His Majesty when all of this was happening and he was supposedly under house arrest. And he said, and you can find the article or the long essay online, right? He said the man was so calm. With all that was happening in Ethiopia, the man was extremely calm. And I've never seen a man so cool, so steely, so firm in his conviction as His Majesty. It was as if the man knew the inevitability of what was going to happen to Ethiopia, and he did not want to stop it. He did not want to go out and try to prevent what was happening by violence, because it had to happen, right? So, with that said, let's look at the Dirge, right? The Dirge did not begin in the 1970s. It began at the coronation of His Majesty, right? Now, Ethiopia is a tripartite, basically, back then. It was a tripartite government, which was the church, the military, and the emperor. And we see that in the 1890s war with Menelik and against the Italian, all right, where the church rallied the people them. All right, the church rallied the people to come out and fight, and the military go out and fight, and they fight for the emperor who was the leader of the military. So yeah, the church, the military, and the emperor. That's a tripartite. Now, they all have to be working together for the Ethiopian state to run and function properly at that time, right? So, when His Majesty was crowned emperor, and he said it in his autobiography, the normal procedure was that the empress would be crowned and anointed later on in the night, way up in the attic by the Abuna. Because the whole anointment signify the expression of power. Right? So the Abuna anoint His Majesty, and therefore the Abuna solidify his own position in the tripartite. But when His Majesty told him that the Empress has to be crowned right there beside him, Abuna didn't like that, because that is the first sign of the erosion of his authority over the people of Ethiopia. And the Abuna wanted to have authority and wanted to maintain his authority over the people of Ethiopia, right? Especially those who will consider themselves Christians. We might, you know, properly call Coptic Christians. And that was the first sign that his power and authority over the people of Ethiopia would be eroded, right? The second sign was when His Majesty edicted that the Bible that the Abuna and the priest use in the church which was then in the liturgical language of Ge'ez, would be interpreted into Aramaic, so that the average Ethiopian would be able to read it for themselves and discern the word of the Creator for themselves, right? That was another erosion of the church's authority. So the church see themselves getting weaker under His Majesty. They're getting weaker because now, right, that hold that they had over the Ethiopian people was being diluted, was being released. Because now every individual, just like in the West, every individual have the Bible, right? Even though it makes very little difference, but at least people read the Bible and see the irrationality in it, and have the opportunity to put it to the side based upon, trying to interpret it as real history, right? So the church and their Buddha realized that them losing power. And the person who was taking the power away from them and giving it to the people was His Majesty. His Majesty again came out with one other thing and said, we don't want too much this long mourning period where you go to church and you give money and you do a whole lot of mourning and all of that. That's unnecessary. We're done with that, right? You spend all this time praying and hoping that your loved one go to particular heaven that they are born and tell you about. We no more of that. The Boone of them felt again with that edict that they were losing power. The power was being diluted drastically. By who? His Majesty. His Majesty come out again and says that peonage, indebted peonage, that the West called slavery in Ethiopia, had to finish. It was totally different type of slavery, and it wasn't slavery in the classical sense of how black people endured enslavement in the West. This was you working off a debt. Maybe you're working off rent that you owe, right? What a lot of people didn't understand, or don't understand even today, is that the church was the biggest landlord in Ethiopia in the days of His Majesty. Biggest landlord. They had more land and were collecting more rent than the monarchy. They were the biggest landlord in Ethiopia. And if you can't pay your rent, you work it off. And you become enslaved with that because you can never end up working off. They're setting the rate and you never end up paying it off. And the more you work, the more you borrow from them, the more you end up in this debt peonage, called debt slavery, right? And His Majesty ended that. The church felt devastated with these things. They felt devastated. Why? They're losing power. And them losing a certain amount of power over the people. And them losing money. The church was rich. The church had as much money as the monarchy, maybe more than the monarchy. Remember now people were donating money to the church on a daily basis and more so on Sundays. When the priests them come out in them procession, it's gold and diamond, gold. That's the eyes. The amount of gold these priests were wearing. They were rich, right? So they start feeling as if somebody's taking something from them. Them losing. Them losing out. And who is doing it? Tafari Makanen, Emperor of Ethiopia, also known as HAILE Selassie, the emperor, was taking all of that from them, the church. So the church felt that they were losing a lot of power. And what drove the nail in the head no more than anything else is it when His Majesty say, listen, the choice of Abuna is going to stay in Ethiopia. And the emperor is going to choose who's going to be the Abuna. Forget about the Greeks and the Greek Orthodox Church. They're not going to decide who's the Abuna in Ethiopia. We are going to decide who is in Ethiopia. All right? And for those of us who don't really know how European system set up, right? It's a hierarchy. I mean, people are placed in line and sit down and wait them turn. So in Greece, right, Greece already set up them hierarchy as to who is going to be the Abuna in Ethiopia and who is coming after him and after him and after him because they're the one who is deciding. And therefore, all of these Abuna in Ethiopia were now subject to influence by the Greeks. Then, if you want to be Abuna, you better do what the Greeks say because the Greeks is the ones who are going to decide who becomes Abuna. And these guys that were in line to become Abuna who find themselves now at the mercy of His Majesty's choice were upset more than anything else. This was the nail in the coffin. See? This was it. So His Majesty came out as if he was an enemy of the church. But all he was doing was cleaning up the church. He had to clean up the church. The church wasn't right. There was nothing proper about it. It was just big influencing and, you know, doing all kind of things that wasn't right and suitable for the people. It wasn't right and suitable for the people. You know? One last thing, all right? His Majesty saying his autobiography. I think, I'm not sure if it's the first volume or the second volume, that missionaries came to Ethiopia and he allowed the missionaries to go speak or to go, where them call it, um, go speak to, I don't know the religious terms, I'm not into the religion, to go administer with only what we would have called the animist. These were traditional people who see creation and see the creator in every object. And His Majesty said to the missionary, the European missionary, you can't talk to the Coptic Christians, but you can talk to the animist. Right? Give them a structure. And so that happened. But the church did not. The church in Ethiopia, the Coptic church, was not one who wanted to bring in the animists them into Christianity. They were satisfied with the people, you know, they consider themselves the elite, the ruling elite, the Hamaras, right? So you see, the church didn't have no love for His Majesty. And would not have any love for His Majesty because they were run by men who could not see the truth, who couldn't see the light. They could not see the light. And they were stuck into a archaic, superstitious belief system that was totally irrational. Right? So the church became one arm of the Dirge. They became one arm of the Dirge. They wanted His Majesty out of the way so that they could continue with their power and then power surge and then, you know, hunting down for money and all that, right? And controlling people by fear, all right? So the second leg was the monarchy. Very interesting. set of people them now, right? These were not just His Majesty as monarchy. These were princes and dukes and all of this. Huge monarchy was thousands of people in the monarchy. Third cousin, fourth cousin of Menelik and His Majesty and family members and married into that. So the monarchy was huge. And the monarchy now believe that because they are monarchy, they are inherently superior to everybody and they're the ones who should be running Ethiopia. And they were influenced by the feudal attitude of Europe, where the king is absolute and the king do and say everything he wants and everybody have to bow down to the king and everybody bow down to the king is bowing down to the monarchy, which means they're bowing down to them. Because being a part of the monarchy means they consider themselves within the realms of the king. They're not outside the realm of the king. They're within the realm of the king and they go out and they speak for the king. So their words is for the king. Their words is representative of the emperor, right? That was their thing. And they didn't like what was happening. One of the first things they didn't like that His Majesty did was to introduce a constitution to Ethiopia. It's Ethiopia had a constitution. People don't understand that, right? So Ethiopia wasn't just a monarchy after that. Ethiopia became a constitutional monarchy where the people in Ethiopia had recognizable constitutional rights. Recognizable constitutional rights. You can go ahead and find the Constitution of Ethiopia, the first one, I believe in 1955. And so the monarchy believed then that they are losing power too. Their power is being eroded. And who's eroding it? His Majesty. And His Majesty began to promote administrative state where merit was more important than bloodline. His Majesty sent a lot of students into the West to learn Western way of, I say Western science then, right? And people remember that Ethiopia was one of the most modern states in Africa in terms of Western viewpoint, right? Ethiopian Airlines was one of the first airlines in Africa. And of course, everybody knew that Ethiopia was never colonized. And it wasn't because Ethiopia had the biggest gun, but because Ethiopia was the smartest and the most divine and rational nation that Europeans couldn't conquer. And they didn't even want to conquer. They tried, they wanted to. You know, His Majesty outsmart them. During World War II, they wanted to move in. But His Majesty would put his government in England so they couldn't overthrow his government while he's in England. You understand? So the administrative state became the most focal point of His Majesty drive to modernism, into modern life. And the administrative state meant that the monarchy was being eroded. And if you read the Constitution, you realize that the monarchy was being eroded drastically. And the monarchy was being eroded so much so that His Majesty's son, as for Wilson, tried a regicide. He tried to take over the government from his father. He tried to overthrow his own father as emperor because he believed that the direction His Majesty was going into was to put the monarchy as the spiritual representative of the people of Ethiopia and not the one that was doing the day-to-day administration of the state. The power was being shifted over to the people. Asfa Watson didn't like that. And under the influence of other monarchs, he tried to overthrow His Majesty. Most people don't remember that, you know. A lot of people jump up and talk about Zara Yaqub and this and that and that. His father tried to overthrow the government. His father tried to take over the emperor position. and it didn't work. Right? And guess what? His Majesty didn't come at him with violence and exile him and do all of that. His Majesty indicated to him that we know your moves. We know what you're going to try. We know what you're going to do. And we counter that. Not with violence, but with rationality. And we get rid of that. And as for what he couldn't even believe it himself, because him swear to God said, I'm going to go to prison. But he didn't. Right? And he went to, where did he go? England? I think he went to England. All right? But he could have stayed in Ethiopia. Wasn't a problem. But they did not forget that the monarchy was being eroded drastically. Right? And they continued planning. The planning continued. Because at the time, the administrative state was not complete, right? The military was being run by monarchs, basically. It was almost like a feudal time. Military was being run by monarchs in a sense. The brigadier and the generals and all these people were monarchs. They were princes and dukes and barons and all these people, to use the English terms, that was running the military. So they started to act together to get rid of the emperor. But they wanted, right, to institute or to bring in Asfawasan as the emperor at the time, right? So the planning start. And there are a couple of things that happened for us to know that the planning had begun, right? For example, the church in Ethiopia, the Coptic Church, is a big administrative organization, right? They do death and marriage and birth and baptism, and they maintain these records, right? So when someone make them transition, the church is the one who do the records. It's not like in the United States where you bring in the medical examiner, it's the church. And the departed family member identify him and the church put it up on paperwork and say, yes, he's passed and all of that. It's the church who does that. And birth is the church. Marriage is the church, right? The church went on strike. The church struck and went on strike and refused to do any of those duties. And people of Ethiopia was in uproar. Of course, you know they were going up in uproar. But the church feel like no, that this is their time to get back and to show His Majesty that them still have some power. We still have some power. We can strike and we can upset the whole Addis Ababa society and the Ethiopian society and let people know that yes, we have some power. And this is what we're going to do. We struck. We go on strike. No church, no marriage, no birth certificate, no baptismal, okay, no renting and no property. And that was one of the beginning. Then the monarchy, as leading the military, turned power over to individuals who they know were against the monarchy, right? Remember Mengistu. Mengistu considered himself a communist, but he was more or less just an individual trying to seek power. right? So we can call him Colonel Mengistu. So remember this now, right? Ethiopian military is huge. It's traditional. It have a whole other history, right? It have generals and brigadiers and all of that. And out of the plain blue, a colonel took over. No, there had to be somebody supporting him. The higher ranks had to be supporting him. People up at top, the generals and the brigadiers had to be supporting him, and they were the monarch. So they supported Colonel Mengistu, Mengistu, and he claimed to have taken over in a coup. And the church did nothing. The church set to the side, and the military did nothing but to take over and to show force. All right? And the people loyal to His Majesty did nothing because His Majesty did nothing. His Majesty did not rally the troops and tell people to take to the streets and start this humongous civil war in Ethiopia. That came later. He did not do that. So the church, the military, and the monarchy came together against His Majesty to prevent the emergence of the purely administrative state and the removal of the monarchy from the day-to-day running of this country, Ethiopia. I've read the last constitution that was supposed to have been in place in Ethiopia, and they made sure that they did the overthrow before that last constitution was ratified in Ethiopia. And these are some of the things that stood out to me, right? It 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 was put together under the consultation of an American constitutional scholar, and it were more precise than the U.S. Constitution in terms of the rights that it accorded people. For example, in the Constitution, no individual could have been arrested and not face charges for 24 hours. This is constitutional rights. In New York City, it became a right accorded to you by the courts, right? You know, I remember in New York City, they went to court and the judge say, you know, if they don't charge you, they have to release you within 24 hours. In Ethiopia, that became a constitutional right, right? Um, the Crown Council, if someone else might not know, the Crown Council is a council that put together the individuals to be considered to be emperor. And they are basically the council that sit above the emperor, right? I mean, it wasn't a one-man thing, like a one-man dictatorship. There was still a crown council, right? But His Majesty maintained certain authority over certain important constitutional things in Ethiopia. For example, the Crown Council could override whatever His Majesty said. This is based upon the constitution that never came about. With three quarters of the vote, them override His Majesty. Three quarters. That means the Crown Council had ultimate power in Ethiopia. And the Crown Council decided on who become emperor next. It was always there, but it had more authority under this constitution that never happened because the Dirge happened before the constitution could pass. And this constitution created more rights for the Ethiopian people that was in the 1955 constitution, a lot more, and move the monarchy away from the day-to-day running of the government and created an administrative state in Ethiopia. Nobody didn't want that. Who had power? You know, the elite in the in the monarchy, elite in the church, and the same monarchy were the elites in the military. They didn't like that. They didn't want that. Right? They wanted feudal lifestyle to continue. You know, they look at Europe and see the European feudalism and they loved it. You know, absolute power in the king. Whatever the king says, law. But they said, no, we're not that. We're not going to do that. That's not our move. Right? Some years ago, yeah, about 20 odd years ago, right? Um, the Enderasa for the Crown Council was Prince Fakir. Came up to the Bronx and met with me in my office, and we spoke for many, a couple of hours, not many, a couple of hours. We spoke for about 2.5, 3 hours. And he laid it out to me in terms of what the Crown Council is and what their position is. My position is, at the time, why not um, crown an emperor, right? And Zara Yacob was the one everyone was pushing to become emperor and say the Crown Council and the Enderasa, who is the leader of the Crown Council, should crown Zara Yacob as the emperor, right? And the Enderasa told me at the time that Zara Yacob was not ready, and they don't see the Crown Council. The council itself did not see Zara Yacob as the emperor. He didn't have the emperor material. It might be a little bit tough because they're looking at His Majesty, who was a world figure, and then looking at Zara Yacob, who most likely was just a local monarch who wanted to bring feudalism to the people of Ethiopia. And he just couldn't match up to His Majesty, his grandfather. Couldn't match up to his grandfather. You understand? Prince Fakir is also his Majesty grandson. All right? Hermias, who was later on being pushed as the one to become emperor, did not match up either. So since it's 50 years now, and the Enderasa has not found the proper person to be crowned as emperor of Ethiopia, that person might just be born, and that person might be a teenager, that person might be an adult moving quietly through the scene and putting things together, right? But they're not ready. And I've seen what the fiction has caused between the family, right? The two split, for example, right? Um, Ethiopian World Federation was created by His Majesty and the doctor. I remember a doctor named out in Long Island. Did some research at it, right? And he came here, and Ethiopian World Federation was even a chapter in Jamaica that became 12 Tribe of Israel. And the England sect of His Majesty family created what they call the Imperial Ethiopian World Federation. And they began to put themselves out there as the official representative of the youth of the World Ethiopian World Federation. They call themselves the IEWF. And there was a fiction within a lot of the Rastafarian community as to who should take over, the IEWF or the EWF. Who they called me in to mediate. I think I went to Abuna Fox's church in Brooklyn called the Church of HAILE SELASSIE. And there was this big thing. It wasn't resolved. But the EWF that was founded many years ago before the IEWF maintained that official position as representative of the Ethiopian people, not the IEWF. So individuals who want to become Emperor of Ethiopia has to maintain a standard of unity and have to move towards the creative force. You have to. And since 1975, no leader of Ethiopia has done that. Ethiopia has become a fractured place. And we see that everybody who wants to rule Ethiopia has gotten an opportunity to, and has not done anything but create more strife and disunity. This one know that we have the Muslim. They wanted to rule Ethiopia for a long time. You get it now. Let's see. All right. Heavy-handedness, war with the Oromo, right? War with the Letters Organization, TPLF, ELF, and all of that. You know, Eritrean people. War with Eritrea, which would never have happened if His Majesty was there. Okay, because Eritreans are Ethiopian, just that them slice off a piece of Ethiopia and call it Eritrea by the Italians. But they are Ethiopians, right? War with the Oromos, thousands of people dead. Ethiopians killing Ethiopians with all of these governments from Mengistu come all the way down. And this current one bringing in a lot of Muslim and damaging the environment, doing all kind of things, starting conflict with Egypt, you know, building a dam to restrict the amount of water that goes down into Egypt. Right? It's crazy. And the government has been co-opted by the West. It was never colonized, but they are now colonized mentally. You know, it's a split place. The Arabs, who basically co-opted African civilization without understanding African civilization and understanding African religion, co-opted it, is there now. And all of these Arab countries are there. They're not Muslims. They're not Islamic. Islam is the way of peace. That's what Islam means. And they will not tell you where it started. But I can tell you that Islam began in Ethiopia. Bilal, who is the caller of the first Adhan, took Muhammad from Medina in Saudi Arabia all the way up to Ethiopia. And they will tell you that Bilal was a slave. And believe that that sounds derogative to Bilal, but not derogative to them. Because if you're an Arab from way back in 622, and you're going to tell us that you were holding a black man, because Bilal is a black man, you're holding a black man as a slave. Tell us that you were enslavers from way back then. Arabs were enslavers from even before 1490s. So when you tell us that Bilal is a slave, that doesn't make no sense, right? But when the tribe of Quraysh chased Muhammad out of Medina because they didn't like that he was preaching truth and rights, Bilal took him to Ethiopia. And Bilal will call the angel, tell him to listen, read. And Bilal gave him the structure of Islam that was there in Ethiopia at the time. Islam was always in Ethiopia and is always in Ethiopia. It's native to Ethiopia. Ethiopia is the land where the gods love to be, And you can interpret that for no basic European way, right? You have to interpret it in a more African deep thought way, where we look at things. The gods love to be there because that's where the gods are. That's where the gods came from. That's where it all came from. And that's why you find the Quran tracks the Bible. It tracks the story of the Bible, the Quran. So it's not nothing original that Muhammad went there and just make up a new religion. It was always in Ethiopia. And Muhammad was a black man too. But they don't want you to know that because you have some Islamic people who are extremely racist. And they want to have nothing to do with Africa because they trace them root back to Europe, Eurasia, Denisovian. All right? So His Majesty knew where all of this was going. And he saw the cycle through all of this. He knew where it was heading. Have to be a fracturing to be a comeback together. And despite what's going on, the comeback together is happening in Ethiopia, irrespective of the fact that they maintain some kind of European way of life and European politics below the surface. The youth them know what's going on, and the youth them is realizing who His Majesty is.